Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Work Comp Update, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Michelle Wilcox and I will be your moderator today. I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We don't control the audio on your devices do. So try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If the telephone line goes down during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you're using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will try to work your questions and feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we completely run out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we are offering the mandatory preventer sexual harassment training in English on June 11th this year. Our presenter today is Deborah Parker of Aspen Risk Management Group. Deborah's professional career has spanned both the carrier and brokerage sides of the business as a workers' compensation specialist. She has held increasing levels of responsibility in underwriting, marketing, branch management, and in-home office operations leadership roles. She's held the role of safety and risk consultant with Aspen Risk Management for over 10 years. With that, welcome, Deborah, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen properly here and get this presentation going. Michelle, if you don't mind just verifying that that's working.
It looks like you've got, the presentation's not up yet, Deborah.
Okay, give it a minute here.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh,
there you go.
We're good. Okay. Well, thank you everybody again for being here. I'm presenting today on one of my favorite subjects. I love workers' comp. It's been my career for a very long time. And I'm going to share with you some updates over the past year and what we might be expecting in the coming year. If I can get my mouse to work over here. Where are you? Okay, just a quick disclaimer. The presentation is not intended to be a consulting or advice to you as a client or establish that between us. I'm also not a claims expert. So as Michelle did my bio, you can see I'm more of the underwriting, marketing, and safety background. However, I do have a perspective of claims over the many years in business. And we do have a large team of claims professionals. So if you have questions in depth about claims that I can't answer, or even HR, we've got a very expertise team that I can go to and get back to you on. So with that, what we're going to talk about today is the financial status of the industry and why that's important to you, important impacts on the workers' comp system, and more importantly, how to reduce your cost in your organization for workers' comp, and a little peek into the future, see if we can find out what we can anticipate going forward. So first, before we get started, we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. Have you attended a previous Heffernan webinar before? Michelle's going to pop that on the screen for you.
Yeah, that's a tongue twister. I always get hung up on it. Heffernan webinar website. Looks like give it a couple more seconds here. We've got about 70%. Thanks for everybody for being so quick on the trigger here. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and post the results.
So I can't see the results, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind letting me know.
71% said yes and 29% said no.
Awesome. Okay, well, good. Welcome back, you guys. Also, what kind of business are you in? We're going to address some of the businesses in particular, but are you in hospitality, agriculture, construction, or manufacturing? Sorry, we had to lump all those together. Wholesale, retail, nonprofit, or government, or other?
Okay, let's give it a couple minutes here. Yeah, there's a lot of options out there. Okay, so we've got about 81%. Okay, so let's go ahead and close the poll. And we've got 10% hospitality, 10% agriculture construction, 18% wholesale resale or retail manufacturing, 32% nonprofit or government, and 30% other.
Wow. I wish we had more room to ask about other, but looks like mostly nonprofit and government then, percentage-wise. Great.
Yes.
Okay, the current state of the work comp system, we're going to get into that, and why it's important to you is the health of the system really dictates a lot of what we call in the industry hard market, soft market. So a hard market would be where capacity is an issue, you can't find coverage very easily, or underwriters are very strict on the coverages they'll accept, and the rates are high. So when the industry is not healthy, when they're not making money, that's usually becomes a hard market. And a soft market would be just the opposite. Coverages are easy to get, it's very competitive, you can shop rates pretty low, and you know, that's kind of where we want to be as an employer, right? Is be able to get those low rates. So as you can see, for the total property and casualty industry, net written premium growth between 2021 and 2022, the workers' compensation has gone up 11.2 compared to 2021. The whole industry, all property and casualty, has gone up $61 billion. So we've had some growth, and that could be good or bad, right? I mean, if the rates are going up and that's the reason the premium's higher, that's not a great thing. But if payroll is up, the economy's healthy, that can also influence the premium growth. So here's the direct written premium by state. I'm not certain how many of you are California only, but I'm guessing probably a good majority of you. But this presentation covers all states, so it's all mostly NCCI states. California looks like it's either stable or slightly risen in net written premium change, so that looks pretty stable. Combined industry ratio. So we talked about the health of the industry, and the health of the industry is based on this combined ratio. So 100 being equal, right? So if you get a paycheck and you get $100 on your paycheck and you have $100 expenses, you break even. If you go under, obviously you've got a little extra slush fund. And if you go over, you're owing some money, right? So you can see between 2021 and 2022, that has gone from just below, just a little profitable to, 102. So we're becoming unprofitable at that level on just the combined ratio. Now, there are other factors that allow insurance companies to continue to operate because they've got investment income and that type of thing on top of that. So these are just operating ratios. However, if you break it down into different lines of business, workers' comp has improved. So from 2021 to 2022, they actually improved by 3 points. What's really dictating this, unfortunately, is personal auto, commercial auto. Those are the two lines of business that are deteriorating. So look out for your auto insurance renewal, right? And if we break out what the profitability components are, workers' comp, that being, what did we say, 84 combined ratio. So of that 84, loss ratio is the largest portion of that. So that's the amount of losses divided into the premium that they're able to collect as a ratio. And that dropped 3 points. However, adjusting losses, so the expense of claims adjusting expenses, went up 1 point. Underwriting expense ratio is basically keeping the lights on. It's an operating ratio. you know, the rent, the payroll, all of that stuff is the underwriting expense ratio, and that stayed level. Dividends dropped down a little bit, those carriers that pay dividends these days. So you can see the loss ratio was the main component that contributed to the profitability this year, which is really a great sign for the economy and workers' comp. The change by component, as we mentioned, it could be a good thing or a bad thing when premiums go up. In this case, payroll has increased almost 23%, and where the losses have decreased almost 21%. That's a good sign. That when payroll goes up and losses go down, that's a really good sign. And you can see the changes in payroll by component. So whether or not we're hiring new people or we're giving them more in their wage rate. What I like seeing here is the leisure and hospitality really bouncing back. COVID really took a hit on that industry. So in 2020, that didn't look great. 2021 to 2022, really bouncing back there. And I don't know, maybe some of the nonprofit might be considered education and health. I'm not sure where you guys would fall, but you know, take a look at your category there. We're still seeing some direct impact of COVID. They're still capturing those accident years that we experienced COVID claims. It's a very minor part of the total losses at 1% of the frequency. So that's really dropping down. In fact, I just saw today that our claims department indicated that the record keeping for that is now expired. Not sure if they'll pick that back up again, but as far as presumptive cases and all of that, they don't have to capture that any longer. So that's great. If we look at lost time injury costs, now these are actual claims that we pay out lost wages where the employee has been out of work for a period of time, and broken down by industry. Got miscellaneous, which I think a lot of you fell into, or the other category actually went up 6.7. Manufacturing is up. Where contracting, which is a really good news, is down because that's the most severe industry that experiences like fatalities and serious injury losses. So good to see their frequency down. And then this is workers' comp lost time injuries by type of injury. And although strains, slip and falls, you see the big, large circle there, that means there's a lot of them, but they are dropping down. So the frequency is decreasing, which is wonderful. All good news stuff. Medical costs, if you wonder where the costs are going, 41%, the largest portion of medical costs go to the physicians. That doesn't seem surprising, right? Outpatient versus inpatient, prescription drugs, medical supplies, and other. And this is just an overview. So the 84% combined ratio that we saw was a calendar year basis. They also track it by accident year. So 97% still profitable. Net written premium increase we knew about. Reserve redundancy, as I mentioned, there's other ways that insurance companies make money. So that reserve redundancy is important to keep that high. Claim frequency decreasing. Unfortunately, severity cost increased and severity of medical costs increased. So we still have some potential ongoing impacts of COVID with some increased rates in different industries that were more likely impacted, such as healthcare. We've got some legislative changes, shifts in industry risk assessment. Impact on claims experience was apparently minor, but it varied by industry, of course. Remote work considerations, that's a big one because we're going to see a slide next or soon regarding the remote working. And long-term health effects, this is the quote unquote long COVID, and economic factors. So we probably haven't rebounded completely from some of the economic factors that occurred from COVID, but there might have been some positive fallout from those economic factors. a lot more telemedicine, and we'll take a look at that too. Things that came out of the COVID era that really might be helping us. So if we just talk about cost of claims, the average cost of a workers' comp claim in 2022, that's the most recent data, was seen as $45,000. That's a direct cost. That's the medical portion, the lost time portion, all of that. The indirect cost of a claim is estimated to be 2/3 or more of the direct cost. And an indirect cost of a claim would be things like downtime in production. A claim occurs, you've got to stop everything, you've got to investigate the claim, you've got to look at maybe a machine that might have caused the injury, the supervisor has to investigate. They're taking time out. They may have to hire a temporary employee or retrain another employee to take over that person's job. So there's a lot that goes into that indirect cost that below the obvious direct cost. And then you got to consider your cost of doing business. So your profit margins might be anywhere from 1% to 3%. And this is a surprising statement. I know that it seems weird, but a cost of a $45,000 claim could cost you millions in your company. And any of you that are responsible for convincing upper management to do loss prevention in your company, pay attention here. So you can go to this website. There's a nice reference at the bottom here where you can go, Safety Pays Estimator, and plug in your direct costs. So maybe go in your organization, find out what your average claim cost is in your organization. Plug that in as a direct cost. It will automatically calculate your indirect costs from there. And then it will give you sales based on the profit margin that you input. So if it's 1%, 2%, 3%, it'll calculate this. So your total sales to cover the cost of a $45,000 direct claim is $3,150,000. So a lot of times, you know, it might be hard to convince upper management to make some changes along the safety line. This is a good one to use. So just pictorially, here's, you know, an iceberg, and the iceberg tip is things you can see, right? You can see the iceberg coming up on the bow of your boat of medical bills and paid leave for the injured employee. What you can't see that could really hurt you is the indirect costs below. And this is an example of a healthcare company with a direct cost of, you know, medical bills, paid leave being seen, but the indirect cost to them would be call outs, staff turnover, burnout, or poor performance. They call it presenteeism versus absenteeism, right? They're working longer shifts, quality of care is reduced, and the lower patient satisfaction ratings happen. So here's a little bit of good news. If we look back, way back, like 1973 to 2022, you can see the work-related injury and illness incident rates, and this is per 100 of employees based on 2.8 recorded cases per 100 full-time employees, and that's up from 2.7 last year for 2022. But you look at 1973, and it was 11. The ratio was 11 per 100 full-time employees. So really dramatic drop over the years. And 1973 is right about, I think 73, 75 is right about when OSHA entered the picture and started regulating safety for employers. So no matter how you feel about OSHA, it may be coincidental, but I think, you know, the attention to safety began in that era, and it seems to be working. So you can see from 1999 to 2019, the total number of injuries is down 61%. Fatal injuries is down 12%. So really great stuff. So we're going to get into the types of claims, and I just thought we'd kind of poll you and see what you think the most frequent cause of injury in the workplace is. Do you think it's overexertion, lifting and strains, auto accidents, falls, struck by, or other, and not sure?
Okay, it looks like we're getting some votes in. Just a friendly reminder that this presentation is going to be available a follow-up email be sent later, and it's being recorded as well. So I know we have one attendee that missed the first 20 minutes. So I just thought that would be a good time to let everybody know that this will be available. Okay, it looks like we've got a majority in, and 68% said overexertion, lifting, strains, 2% auto accidents, 24% falls, 2% struck by, 5% other or not sure.
Okay, let's see what we got here.
The majority was overexertion, lifting, and strains.
Yep.
The next one was falls.
Right.
I'm going down in order now. Then other, then auto and struck by both were 2%.
Well, a lot of you were correct, because if you look at the top, this is Liberty Mutual's Workplace Safety Index for 2022. They publish this every year. Overexertion was number one, and the cost in billions to employers, $12.6 billion, with 21.76% of the total claims. Falls being next, struck by being next, falls to lower level next. Roadway incidents, interestingly enough, was down to number 6. So that was surprising to me, actually. I thought auto accidents would be a little higher. So good job, guys. You got the overexertion right. So when they compile these top 10 causes of the most serious disabling workplace injuries, those that cause employees to miss work for more than 5 days, and ranked by direct cost to employers based on medical and lost wage expenses. So that's what you just saw. And here's the top 3 based on that safety index. So when you think about what is happening, what do we need to look out for? So along the lines of prevention, as you think, okay, overexertion involving outside sources, handling objects, the most likely is lifting, right? Lifting boxes, perhaps in a warehouse. Number 2, falls, wet floors, if that's a fall on the same level. Same thing with struck by. I don't know how many times I've walked through like warehousing, and they've got mezzanines with no toe boards, and there's items up above that can fall. Employees are walking down below, or construction sites with scaffolding, no toe boards, things that can drop down below. So we've got to watch all of that, and that's a level of measurement of prevention that you can take when you start seeing this. So can we design out the need to lift or use mechanical lifting devices? So maybe somebody's lifting large boxes, 60 pounds each individually. Can we either get 2 employees to lift that same box, or can we start packaging things into smaller boxes, maybe 40 pounds, and one person can more easily lift that? Or should we start training our employees and get forklift drivers? Are floors and walkways kept clear, level, and dry? Do we restrict access underneath the work areas, like we mentioned, the mezzanines and the scaffolding? Do we design our work to reduce awkward end range or prolonged postures? This is a very common one in the workplace of, standing for long periods of time, packaging or assembling, ergonomic type issues. So where are the most dangerous places to work? I think I mentioned construction. I gave this one away earlier, but it consistently ranks among the industries with the highest rates of workplace accidents, and more particularly fatalities. Manufacturing, I think some of you are in manufacturing. Common accidents in manufacturing include equipment malfunction, slip and fall, injuries from handling machinery. Agriculture, farming remains one of the most hazardous occupations globally. And lumped into that, of course, is the high seas. Think of Deadliest Catch or something like that. That's lumped in there too. Transportation, obviously vehicle accidents, transportation of hazardous materials, long hours leading to fatigue-related incidents. So think of those truck drivers. And healthcare is up there. They're facing various workplace hazards, such as exposure to infectious diseases. They were most impacted, obviously, with COVID, the needle stick injuries, lifting, and I highlighted workplace violence because they've been under, in California at least, a workplace violence requirement for having a written an active program. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some of the new factors in the workplace that are impacting our environment are remote workers, and that's the outcrop of COVID. So prior to 2020, the COVID era, less than 10% of the professional workforce worked from home or all or most of the time. And while some experts put remote work at more than 70% during the peak of COVID, today it seems we have normalized with approximately 60% now working primarily from home. So going from 10 to 60%, we've certainly got a shift going on. Another new factor is workplace violence programs, as I mentioned, healthcare, social services, retail. They've historically had experienced higher rates of workplace violence, and that's due to interactions with volatile individuals. So think of the emergency room, characters there, handling of cash, maybe at a gas station, exposures to high stress environments. We've got some legislative and regulatory changes. So many of those jurisdictions have implemented legislations at preventing the workplace violence and protecting workers. We're going to next see that California, just most recently, if you haven't already, you need to implement the SB 553 in California, and that's a whole nother webinar, a whole nother hour to talk about, but definitely look into this if you haven't already. The latest data shows that an average of 1.3 million non-fatal violent crimes occur annually, and there were 57 fatal incidents. Females are twice as likely to be assaulted in the workplace. And I'm not sure, but I've seen it broken out where, maybe the population of workers in healthcare is more female. And also there's a lot of domestic type non-employee interactions that come onto the employer work site. Number of injuries reported by victim-offender relationship shows 43% of incidents are for patients. So we're talking healthcare field. But the next highest was 23% being from students. And I see this a lot because I work with a lot of schools and education as clients, and the uptick in the number of assaults on teachers from students is alarming. So this is an unfortunate trend that we have to get a handle on. Yes, in fact, a lot of them are special ed students, so there's some combative component to their health issues, so that we're dealing with that. Employers must have a workplace violence prevention plan in writing. It must show a responsible party. It must show how to respond to those reports. It has to have ways to communicate to your employee force regarding the workplace violence. Review that plan annually, train all of your employees, and it's got some record keeping and reporting requirements. So it's pretty detailed. And Michelle mentioned that you will get a copy of this presentation afterwards. As an afterthought, I sent Michelle, and she probably hasn't even seen it yet, a document that's got some resource links on it. So hopefully we can get that uploaded for you before that email goes out, and you'll be able to go and see some of these in more detail. Of course, that's if you're a work comp nerd like me and you want to know more.
I'll be sure to get those resources included, Deborah. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. Sorry for the last minute. So, we know these things are happening. So what do we do? Well, how do we prevent them? So conducting self-inspection safety audits is probably the primary thing that you can do and you have control over, and identifying and eliminating hazards in your own workplace. I would encourage safety committees with especially larger organizations where you get a good cross-section of line employees all the way up to supervisors. So you get a very different perspective when you get somebody working day to day on the floor and they see these what I would call near miss accidents or hazards. They're more likely to have good idea of what's going on. Don't forget to make some Zoom calls with your remote employees and review their workspace conditions from an ergonomic standpoint. We do ergonomic remote assessments, and you would be surprised how many people we find that are sitting cross-legged on their couch and have a laptop in their lap and they're trying to work 8 hours a day like that. It's not a good thing. Good housekeeping. just simply keeping the floor clean and clear of any materials that could cause anybody to slip or trip. Remember, you could save yourself $12 billion overall. Provide employees with adequate personal protective equipment and enforce its use. So how many times have I walked through a workplace and the supervisor takes me through and we're not wearing our ear protection, yet all over the place there's ear protection required signs, and that sets a tone. If your supervisors aren't setting the example, it's not enforcing the use, right? Properly train your employees and train often. Newer employees obviously are more vulnerable to an accident because they're not familiar with the environment. They're not yet familiar with the routine tasks that they're going to be working on. But don't forget your seasoned employees. They can always use a refresher course. They're more likely to go, oh yeah, I know that. I know I'm safe. But they're also taking things for granted a lot. You know, they just don't see things sometimes because they've seen it for year after year after year. And it's like you don't see it anymore. And recycle, rinse, repeat. Can't do this stuff often enough. So let's say you can't prevent the claim, but you do have a claim, and claims happen. They're accidents. That's what accidents are. How do you control the cost? So that's the key, is if once it does happen, you can investigate and report quickly. Injured worker to the supervisor, supervisor to HR, HR to the insurance company. Know what your process is and make sure to communicate it down the line so that a worker knows if they get injured, the first person they go to and how to go to them. If they're not available, who to go to next. You know, there should be a whole process very, very clear in your company as to how that works so that you can do it as quickly as possible. Get immediate appropriate medical attention, forget the paperwork, get that employee taken care of. Use your MPNs though. Your medical provider network is most experienced on industrial claims. Develop that quality relationship with them. Let them know what kind of work environment you have, what kind of hazards you have, what kind of claims you've had in the past, what kind of work, modified work you might have available for injured employees. Get that going with the medical facility as much as you can. And communication with the injured person. So once that injury happens, you want to stay in touch. Make them feel assured that you're on top of this. Your insurance carrier, the claims examiner, and the doctor. So everybody needs to be in the loop. Have that strong return to work program, modified duty ahead of time. Don't try to recreate something once somebody's injured. It's too hard. You should have it looked at in your organization. You know, how can we take each job and look at some modified duty potential based on, you know, work restrictions that might be common. So we're going to look at a claim gone wrong. So here's a text from an employee to her HR person. Hey, can't come in today. My back is killing me. I think I'm going to try to see a doc. So the HR person is very kind. Oh, geez, I know what back pain is like. I'm sorry to hear it. Let me know how it goes. Very empathetic, right? Hey, again, the doctor's sending me to PT and says I can't work for 4 weeks. So the employer knows the employee has had a long history of back problems and calling off work, assumes it's just another non-industrial related pre-existing back problem, right? They think they're being great and understanding and respecting privacy by not asking questions. However, the employee contacts the employer 2 weeks later, says, hey, when am I going to get paid? And the employer's like astounded, confused, and explains, hey, you don't have any PTO remaining, you know, assuming the whole while, right, that this is personal. The employee states they should be paid since this is a work injury, and now the doctor is talking about surgery. So this is probably weeks later, right? So the employer HR person is very upset. It's delayed the reporting of the injury. Now they've received a letter of representation from an attorney because the employee is concerned, right? She's worried she's not going to get paid and demands that claim be denied. The employer is demanding this claim be denied, assuming it's not work related. So from the adjuster standpoint, they say this happens all the time. This is a very common scenario. So never assume that the cause of your employee's complaint. Always ask. In most jurisdictions, it's going to be darn near impossible to deny the claim once the employee has settled on their story of a work injury. And don't be afraid of quote unquote creating claims. And this is common to broach the subject of, hey, did this happen at work? There might be some concern like you put an idea in the employee's head, but the claims create themselves if you avoid the details. So the best you can do is determine all the facts up front, report it immediately. Even if you're unsure, you can certainly let your claims adjuster know, hey, this may or may not be work related, and this is why I think so. Let them do their work and let them do it quickly. That's the best thing that you can do to maintain integrity on the claim. So here's a typical example, fictional case, of course, of a workers' comp claim in 2023. So John Smith is a 35-year-old warehouse worker. He's employed by XYZ Logistics, which is a large distribution company. And his responsibilities include loading and unloading heavy cargo, operating forklifts, organizing inventory in the warehouse. Pretty heavy work, right? On a typical work day in 2023, he suffered a severe back injury while lifting a pallet of goods. Not sure why he was lifting a pallet, but resulting in significant pain and limited mobility. So I want to put a caveat here just real quick. You know, when I mentioned that off the cuff, you know, lifting a pallet of goods, just because somebody does something stupid that they're not supposed to do doesn't preclude that as being work related, right? So happens a lot. You know, you tell an employee don't do this, or you assume that it's common sense and they do it anyway. Still work related. So here's the injury and medical treatment that happened here. Upon experiencing the injury, John immediately reported the incident to his supervisor. Yay, that's number one. Sought medical attention from the company's designated healthcare provider. Yay, number two, your MPN. An initial evaluation revealed that John had sustained a herniated disc in his lumbar spine requiring prompt medical intervention. He underwent diagnostic tests, including MRI scans, to assess the extent of the injury and develop a treatment plan. So the course of treatment included physical therapy, prescription meds, injections, occupational therapy, etc. The fact that they got on this really quick is awesome. So the claim process, when John filed that workers' compensation claim with the insurance carrier, seeking coverage for medical expenses, his wage replacement benefits, and vocational rehab during that recovery period, the claim was promptly processed and he received timely authorization for necessary medical treatments and diagnostic procedures. I can't tell you how often we see MRIs are delayed by, you know, poor paperwork, poor communication, late reporting. So that is key, is getting this going quickly and a well-oiled machine here. Throughout the claim process, John's employer provided ongoing support and accommodations to facilitate his return to work as soon as medically feasible. Yay, that return to work modified duty. XYZ Logistics implemented modified duty assignments, adjusted work schedules, and provided ergonomic equipment to accommodate John's physical limitations while ensuring his continued productivity and job satisfaction. That goes a long way to prevent litigation, by the way. So here's the resolution. After several months of intensive medical treatment and rehab, his condition gradually improved, allowing him to return to light duty work. And they collaborated with his healthcare provider, yay again, that communication, right? To develop a phased in return to work, gradually increasing his job duties and getting him back to full strength and mobility. So despite the challenges posed by his injury, successfully transitioned back to full duty. You can imagine that the claim costs on this are well reduced compared to the claim gone wrong, right? So what did we learn in this claim gone right? Timely injury reporting is key. Comprehensive medical treatment, so working with your MPNs, effective communication between all parties, the injured worker, your healthcare provider, everybody. And the proactive return to work strategies is key. Prioritizing that employee's safety, health, and recovery, employers can mitigate the adverse consequences of workplace injuries foster a supportive work environment, and promote sustainable business operations. So here's some successful strategies and best practices, just generally from a work comp claim standpoint. Don't forget about recovery opportunities. And this is important information when you're reporting claims and why it's so important to be detailed in providing the investigation and details of the claim. Subrogation, a very simple example is a rear end accident, right? Somebody else is at fault in that accident. The insurance company will subrogate against that other party, recover those dollars, and apply it back to your case. So reducing your claim cost, right? Fraud and red flags, injured worker, witnesses. This happens a lot less than what people think. But there are those red flags when it's a Monday morning injury, there's no witnesses, or the worker goes out and doesn't report an injury for weeks, months, that kind of thing. Loss control, don't forget to prevent others from being harmed the same way. Remove those hazards immediately. Find out why the injured party was injured and make sure nobody else is. Minimizing the cost of injuries. So after an injury, reporting and investigation, return to work, medical providers, claims team relationship, and broker and agent. All of these aspects, especially the claims team relationship and your broker and agent, you communicate is probably the best thing I can say is everybody needs to be on the same page. Provide fundamental information to supervisors and employees. So, workers' comp is very complex. When I watch what claims examiners do in their world, it's like, wow. And it makes you realize, how much paperwork and how everything is time sensitive. It's incredible. So it would baffle the mind of a person that's injured to see that. I mean, it would frighten you. So, providing the fundamental information to supervisors and employees, resting them assured that their job is safe, that you're following the process, that you've got it covered. Let them know about any kind of reimbursements, like mileage. You may not realize that employees can get reimbursed for mileage going to doctor's appointments. So any other benefits that they may not be aware of, it goes a long way that you're an advocate on their behalf, giving them that information. And you'd much rather them hear it from you than hear it from this guy, right? They're off work, they're home, they're watching TV, and David says, hey, I can help you out. Well, David is helping himself. David gets more money than the injured worker half the time. So you don't want that happening. The cost of a claim we're going to see goes up dramatically. So you want to get care for your injured worker first, do the paperwork later, notify your claims team quickly, give them as much information as you can, and continue to practice actively caring steps. And what are actively caring steps? We're going to talk about that in a bit. You want to minimize the attorney involvement. The longer the reporting period, this is why I was harping on report quickly, the higher the probability of litigation. So here's the percentage of claims litigated reported relative to the report lag. You get into 31 days or more, almost half of those claims become litigated. So you can see the direct correlation to the earlier the report, the less likely you're going to get that litigation. The reporting cost, injuries reported within 2 weeks were 18% more expensive than those reported within 1 week. And as time goes on, you can see at 5 weeks, almost 45% higher in costs. Quick. So understanding the employee perception of workers' comp, I mentioned the mystery and how complex it is. Your communication counts so much, and actively caring steps show you care, treat people the way you would want to be treated, put yourself in their shoes, get help, medical care for injured, get well cards. When's the last time you got a card in the mail? I mean, actually from, a hard copy instead of a text or a phone call or an email. just recently, my dad passed away and my mom got a card from her dental office. Well, it wasn't just a generic condolence card. It was signed individually by, it had to have been like half a dozen of the staff in that office with individual condolence messages. And that went so far for both of us, actually, because I always used to think this dental office was kind of cold and expensive. Changed my tune reading that card. They're an actively caring organization. Flowers or other means of recognition, whatever it, fruit basket, something, whatever. Visits and calls, that may or may not be feasible in your case, but, just checking in every once in a while, especially the supervisor, who probably has a better relationship and a closer relationship with the injured party. Demonstrate understanding and caring behavior goes a long way, and discuss job security. That's a biggie, because if you're out of work and you're injured and you're not quite sure what the prognosis is going to be and how long, you start worrying, how am I going to pay my bills, right? I mean, it doesn't just impact your, time off work. You're looking long term. So the preferred source for information should be provided by employers. This is a workers' compensation perception of workers' comp survey that was done, and I can't recall the source, I'm sorry, but obviously the supervisors, they all have that working relationship. You'd much rather have the employee hear from them than an attorney. So hopefully that was helpful, how to control your costs, what you can do. But what's coming up in the future? And I think we only have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to go quick. You can read this later. Like I said, if you're work comp nerds like me, you'll go dive into it. But here's some key points. Technology, and that comes up every year. I mean, I've been doing this, I don't know, 5-6 years now in a row. Technology is always on the future, and it's always increasing. So we've got now kind of the big buzzword is AI, right? But the good thing is expected to streamline operations, improve efficiency, enhance outcomes for injured workers. So that's all a good thing. And telemedicine falls into that role. Telemedicine and remote work. So here's one of the good outcrops of COVID, right? We had accelerated the adoption of telemedicine and remote work arrangements. So that's now changed the work comp landscape a little bit and the workplace landscape a little bit, but it's improving access to healthcare for injured workers that have a long drive to go to their doctor or underserved areas. So that's all a good outcome. Starting to see more focus on mental health, and that might relate back to these workplace violent incidents. Addressing psychological injuries or the stress-related disorders that result from those injuries. Regulatory reform, we're addressing emerging risks and challenges in the evolving work environment. Workforce trends, we've got some demographic shifts. We've had an aging workforce for a long time. The gig economy expansion happened during COVID as well. So we've got a lot of people maybe working some side gigs. They might be a little exhausted to work both jobs. So the composition of the workforce evolves and new employment models emerge. So that's something to look at within your own organization. Is that going on? Prevention and early intervention, and there's a growing emphasis on this prevention part, which is wonderful. In my world, I'm in the safety and loss prevention business, so it's lovely. Employers, insurers, and safety professionals are investing in proactive risk management, safety training, ergonomic assessments, and wellness programs. That's an awesome thing. We're all working together. And collaborative partnerships obviously improve the outcome for injured workers while ensuring the sustainability of the workers' compensation system. I emphasized a lot of the communication between all of us, healthcare providers, the employer, everybody. Overall, while the future workers' comp may be shaped by various uncertainties, we're adapting to the evolving workforce dynamics will be critical for navigating the changing landscape and promoting a safer, healthier, and more resilient workplace for everybody. So that's what you can see going forward to think about. And I think I just left maybe 10 minutes for questions, Michelle.
Great. We do have a few questions. Going back to that Liberty Mutual chart,
Okay,
Deb, on, it was the slide after the last polling question.
let me see if I can
Somebody,
do that.
yeah, I
Go
think
ahead.
it was, so they were just curious as to whether or not that chart was saying, was it the frequency or dollar loss? And
Okay.
there was a little disclaimer on the bottom, but I thought maybe you could
Is
address
that
that.
this one here?
Yes, that one. Yeah.
This one here is cost in billions. So US businesses spend more than $1 billion a week on serious non-fatal workplace injuries. Is that the question? Is whether
Yeah.
it's, yeah, dollar, yeah.
Okay, let's go with the next one. Somebody wants to know if a worker doesn't contact the company once they've been released to work again, restricted or otherwise, what is the employer's obligation to get them to return, or is this considered abandonment of the job?
Is it considered a what of the job?
Abandonment?
Abandonment? It could be. Again, that's kind of an HR claims question that I'm not completely versed in, but I do know for a fact that benefits can be stopped or denied at that point. If the employer reasonably offers a modified duty to come back to work, or if the employee is released from the doctor to return full duty and they were offered a job and the employee doesn't show, that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, that's more of an HR question at that point.
Okay. The next question, how do we deal with a situation where injuries increase with aging workforce?
Boy, if somebody had the answer to that, they'd be millionaires, huh? Yeah, I think wellness programs definitely play a big part because, I mean, let's face it, you can be in your 50s and diabetic and overweight, or you can be in your 70s and fit as a fiddle and ready to go another 30 years or whatever. There's so many variables in there of, people and work, just their environment and how they treat themselves versus genetics. I mean, there's so much involved, but yeah, that's a good question. That's a hard one. That's a hard one to answer.
Okay, so there's another scenario, an employer with under 50 employees, workers' comp, I'm trying to decipher because they're using a lot of
That's okay.
abbreviations. Workers' comp, the workers' comp employee cleared for back to work with no restrictions after a leave of absence. The question is, may we lay off the employee due to business levels and lack of work, question mark, or is there any liability?
Again, that's a legal HR claims question, and it's probably going to depend a lot on the individual company's policies and procedures that they've already established prior to that occurrence.
Okay.
I would check with, a lot of people have HR portals that provide free legal advice. I would go with those kinds of portals, find access to that will help you answer those questions for sure.
All right, there's another question. Does the mileage reimbursement get provided by the employer or the work comp carrier?
I don't know physically how it happens is it's probably provided by the carrier, but I mean, think about it. The costs are always provided by the carrier, but they're borne by the employer, bottom line, right? Ultimately, the employer bears the cost of the claim.
Right.
Yep.
That makes sense. Okay, somebody's asking if an employee refuses to get treated, I'm assuming from an injury, what can be done?
I come up with some rhetorical answers there, sorry. I don't know. Again, that's something that the communication level has to be between the company and the claims examiner and the employee. Why are they refusing treatment? Do they have religious grounds? I mean, there's so many variables in there, and it's going to depend on the case as to what's going on, as to how you can move forward on that.
Okay, thank you. So there's another question in regards to a telemedicine. If a worker is already seeing a workman's comp doctor, can we switch them to telecom so they don't miss work?
so they don't miss work. In other words, the employer is going to ask for telemedicine to be done versus their,
That's what it
oh,
sounds like.
that's what it sounds like. Yeah, I would definitely get in contact with your claims adjuster first because, once a doctor has the case, it's usually prudent to continue with that doctor. And then you would need a release probably to go to a different doctor. There's all kinds of, like I mentioned, it's very complex to get diagnostics and all of that approval going. You really have to get with your claims examiner on things like that.
Okay. There's another question. Do we have to ensure all employees are on workman's comp? We have an office position. Do they still need workers' comp? And are there different tier of insurance based on risk?
Okay, so say that to me again.
Okay, so it says, do we have to ensure all employees are on workers' compensation? We have an office position. Do they still need workers' comp?
An office
And are
position?
there- Yeah, and are there different tiers of insurance based on risk?
If you're in Texas, that might be one answer. If you're in California, it's a different answer. So sometimes there are certain states that will allow you to not purchase workers' comp, or if you're self-insured. So there's different scenarios. The majority of the time, yes, most states require an employer to provide workers' compensation to everyone, regardless of category of employment. So, and that includes remote workers, sitting at home doing data entry. Those are covered by workers' comp as well. So that's why it's critical to stay in touch with those employees, make sure that they've got good working environment, at home, that they've got, all the tools that they need ergonomically to keep themselves in good condition there.
Right. Okay, then somebody's asking, they are a construction company with 20 employees. Half the workforce is remote, and they're wanting to know if they have to have a workplace violence prevention plan.
I believe, are they in California? So
Not
this
sure.
this is the new California says all employers. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to, follow up with
Follow
that.
that up. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that
Okay.
the resource document that I am providing has the kind of the summary of the California Workplace Violence Program. So they can look at that further if they are a California employer, they can look at that.
Great. Okay, so here's one that says, we are in healthcare and we are in process of our own, it sounds like hiring their own courier drivers. How does work comp work with company drivers?
So yeah, if you're not outsourcing any longer and you're bringing them in-house, they do become employees at that point.
Right.
Yeah, so they would be covered by and it depends on the class code. That gets into kind of the underwriting question, and I would get with your broker on that and definitely let them know that you're doing this so that they can kind of give you an estimate of, they'll need to know the payroll for the drivers and how you're paying them, if you're paying them 1099 or W-2, how to report it to the insurance carrier, under what class code and what rate it'll be. So your broker will be extremely helpful on that.
Great. Okay, and then let's go one last question. What if you offer a modified duty and the employee refused to accept it? As employee, how does it work in a work comp? Wait, as employee, how does it work in a work comp claim? So if you have,
Yeah, you can deny benefits based on that. I do know that part. Yeah.
Okay. All
There's
right.
so many intricacies on those. I would definitely get with claims professionals. As I mentioned in my disclaimer, I'm not a claims professional, but
Right.
yeah, there's some.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. It was a lot of information. And again, we're going to be providing a follow-up email with links to the resources that Deborah mentioned, and also a copy of the presentation. And it was also recorded, so that will be available. We really want to thank everybody today for attending this webinar presented by Heffernan. Thank you, Deborah, for your time and expertise. We hope all of you found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on April 2nd for our exempt and non-exempt employees webinar. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, Michelle.
Take care.